Before we jump into today's show, the team at Lounge Room Chats would like to take a moment and invite you to support us on Patreon. We have some really big things happening at Lounge Room Chats, like the creation of a website and other ventures that we hope and believe will help us in our mission of Catholic apostolicity and evangelization. So we would greatly appreciate it if you would go to our Patreon account, Lounge Room Chats, and give any support you are able, no matter large or small. We really appreciate any donation you are able to make. God bless, and we hope you enjoy the show. Thank you. So, this evening in the Lounge Room, I'm joined by a man, a Catholic man, a physio, and somebody who has travelled to, I understand, 57 countries.
That's right.
Stephen Purcell, thank you for joining me. Welcome.
Yeah, no worries. It's good to be here. Thanks, Tom.
Good. So, of those three things, I think I'm going to work in reverse order, starting with the 57 countries.
Yep.
What the heck is going on there?
Well, 57, yeah, it's a fair bit. It's fewer than I'd like to travel to. I suppose the number depends on two things. It depends on what you mean by country. There's some places that not classified as country, so Wales and Scotland. If I included that, it would go up to 59. It also includes what you mean by visiting a country. So I've been to the airport at Dubai, but I didn't cross immigration, so I excluded that.
Just to be fair, if I was to try and tally up all my countries, I'd be relying on a lot of airports. So you've been conservative, and it's still...
I've been strict, and it's 57.
And it's 57. Countries. So just give me sort of a sprinkling, an overview of the diversity.
I started travelling when I was just turned 20. I went with a mate to Papua New Guinea, or PNG. He convinced me to go after I agreed with a handshake one night in Toowoomba when I was driving him home from somewhere in my car that I assumed he'd forget about, but he held me to it, told me to hold up to my commitment, said pull your finger out, get a passport, let's go. So that was the first one I went to, and that's being thrown in the deep end because it wasn't fun. It was a very rough trip, but That was the start of a passion for travel. Since then, I've travelled a lot. I've moved overseas, and COVID, with the exception of COVID, I try to travel somewhere every year. And it's increased slowly at first, PNG, and then I went to New Zealand and places like that. But then it snowballed, and I do big trips. I went to 5 countries in a day, and it just went up and up and up.
I was going to say, I didn't mean to be rude, but a country a year, you're not 57.
No.
So you've stacked the deck somewhere. So
yeah.
I know from a mutual friend of ours, somebody who I think you know probably a little bit better than me, Tam Martinez.
That's right.
Who's in Portugal. So I've gotten to know Tam pretty well recently. She's a bit of a regular on the show. She's just a great person, great girl.
She is, yeah.
But I understand we were talking before we went live on the show, and you've done a bit of travelling with her.
I have, yeah. So I've done 2 dedicated trips with Tam. I met her probably 2013 in the UK summer, so September, I'd say. We got on like a house on fire. We'd travelled together with friends, and then we took 2 dedicated trips, one in 2015 and then one in 2019.
Okay. And were you involved in the, what would you call it, Eastern Europe trip?
Yeah, that was that was both of those trips, I guess.
Okay.
In 2015, I went with her after a road trip through Italy. I went with her east overland all the way to Georgia,
right?
Armenia. That's in Far Eastern Europe. And in 2019, again, I caught up with her in Moscow, and we travelled for a week through Western Russia.
Okay. The reason I'm so interested in particularly the first of those trips is Tam and I share a passion for wine, and it's generally well accepted that the birthplace of wine as we know it today, the cradle is Eastern Europe, be it Turkey, Georgia, and Armenia.
I believe.
Georgia,
yeah.
So and Armenia. But I just want to ask you, tell me about that trip.
That trip, well, it's fair to say it was wine soaked.
Yep.
Plenty of the nectar of the gods were flowing.
Yeah.
On trains through Turkey, we're enjoying a nice red. In Georgia, plenty of beautiful wines there. Saperavi is a popular blend or grape, not a blend, a grape. Armenia, I'm not sure what their specialities are, but wine there is very good, very high quality, very consistent, very good value. I believe you can actually have a bath in red wine in Georgia as well at some health spas and resorts. You can submerge yourself in the red stuff. Yes.
I'm buying a ticket. Absolutely sold.
You should. It's Georgia in particular. Georgia and Armenia are very underrated countries, particularly if you're into wine, of course, but travel, geography, mountains, hiking, food and history, Catholicism especially. Beautiful Christian history in those places.
Yeah, that is my understanding. And let's just go back to the magic number of 57.
Yeah.
So I'm just fascinated because to me that is such a large number. Was there any cheating involved in terms of a clump of small countries that you sort of went boing, 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 boing? Or have you done North America, Asia, Africa? Like, what's the spread?
Well, a bit of both. So a little bit of cheating in that there's some countries that I was in very briefly. So Sweden, I've been to Sweden. I was there for about an hour and a half, perhaps.
It counts.
That counts. So I was there. Kudos to me. Some countries I've visited multiple times, like New Zealand. I've been there 3 times on 3 trips. So some countries I go to, but it doesn't tick off anymore because I've already ticked it off. So it works both ways. Most of the countries would fall in Europe. Europe's full of things that interest me the most. The countries there are very easy to travel around to, so you can easily clock off many countries, even little ones like the Vatican and Monaco, Liechtenstein, places like that. The Pacific, Asia, and I've travelled through North America briefly as well. Never yet been to South America or Africa.
Okay. And with the travel, you may have touched on this previously, but I just want to go back to it. Is it travel for travel's sake? Have you got what they call the travel bug? Or are there particular things that you want to see in particular? So like the history of Europe, or could you just travel anywhere if the opportunity arose?
It's a bit of both. I would probably answer that by saying travel for me is a means to fulfilling several of my hobbies. So it ticks several boxes in one. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's travel for travel's sake, although I do simply just love traveling. But for me, it's more about learning more about Christianity, the history. I love architecture, which is why Europe is so important to me. Food, of course, who doesn't love foreign food? Hiking, trains. I'm a bit of a train freak. I love traveling overland on trains and watching the world go by.
The railway man.
Yeah, you could say that. So I love long distance train trips. I think it's a much more authentic way of doing things. Yep. I love long distance hiking as well. Photography too is another one of my hobbies. So it's a good easy way of fulfilling many of my hobbies.
Okay, and based on the fact that you said you enjoy long distance hiking, I'm going to wager a bet that you've done the Camino.
That's right.
That is very painful for me because I was very close to doing the Camino when the world imploded. And I'm just not sure if I'm ever going to get that opportunity again. So I'm going to take this opportunity to try and, I know you can't give me the start to finish account in the time we have tonight, but just could you summarize for me and the listeners just a bit of an overview of what it was like to do the Camino so I can just live it vicariously as I'm falling asleep tonight? Yeah,
the Camino is hands down the best experience of my life. I've done and seen many beautiful things. None of them match the Camino. It is a religious experience. It's a pilgrimage. It's also a lot of fun as well. A beautiful scenery, beautiful people that you meet, beautiful food. It was also a bit of an eye-opener. It was a bit of a metaphor for life itself. Even though it was only a month-long hike, every day feels a little bit like life in that there's no knowing of what's going to happen. It could rain. The hostels could be full. You could end up sleeping on the road or on a park bench, which happened more than once. It's a bit of a metaphor for life in that you don't need to worry about the past and that there's no point in worrying about the future. You've just got today. You've just got to take up your stick and start walking and come what may. There's no, you can't book ahead. You can't plan ahead. You've just got to get out of bed and start walking. So it was a bit of a metaphor for life. When you finish the Camino, you get to the cathedral at the end and you see it's very, very beautiful place in the big piazza or plaza outside the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela. You get to the end and you're so happy, you're relieved, you get your little certificate, you have a few beers, a few drinks and celebrate. And the next day you're just thinking, well, what do I do now? What on earth am I supposed to do now? You hadn't planned, you hadn't decided, and life sort of hits you again, and that you've got to get back to the rat race and planning and plotting ahead. But last month you never did that. You just found a place to sleep. You slept. You got up and you walked. And you took life a day at a time, an hour at a time.
Well, I was beginning to think that one day I might actually get over the fact that I've missed out on the opportunity. Based on that, I'm not sure I ever will. So thank you. Putting that aside, and sorry, the last questions I'm going to ask on your travel. I just love
away
the idea of travel. What are some of the other incredible things that you've seen throughout your travel? So the Camino, that's just incredible for me. Like, I would love to get the opportunity to do that. But just put that aside. Like, if you were to list the top 5 most incredible things you've seen throughout your travels, what would they be?
Sure, I'll give you a few brief examples, not in any particular order. But apart from the Camino, one that sticks out is seeing the Shroud of Turin. So I was fortunate enough to have time off work when I lived in London to visit the Shroud of Turin when the Pope had it on display, when it periodically goes on display to the public. I'm a big Shroud of Turin enthusiast. I'd studied it at university, just a casual enthusiast, but I knew plenty about it, more than most people. I'm aware that it's not defined or proven as the burial cloth of Christ, but I'm personally convinced of it as such. And so I did everything I could to get my hands on a ticket and fly to Turin to see it. I flew there, and not only in the cathedral did I see the body of, or the tomb of Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati and St. John Bosco in the cathedral, but of course you also, for what you came there for, you saw the Shroud of Turin. I was lucky enough to see it face to face, up close, and when everyone else in my group had left, I stayed just to get a few moments by myself, just me and the Shroud. Beautiful experience to see it, and eventually security sort of move you along for the next group,
right.
But that's easily a standout for me. Another experience would be visiting a monastery in Armenia called Corvyrup. So it's on the foothills of Mount Ararat, which is famous from biblical lore, where the Noah's boat came to rest. Mount Ararat is in Turkey, but this monastery is just on the other side of the border in Armenia. So Turkey and Armenia they're technically at war, so you can't cross between the two. But Mount Ararat's in the background, and there's a little creek and river with lots of security between them, and a monastery sits on this little hill in the foothills of Mount Ararat. It's famous for being essentially the birthplace of Christianity of Armenia. So Armenia, I'm not sure if you're aware, Tom, it was the first country to officially adopt Christianity as its official religion in the 4th century.
Okay.
I think some of the apostles travelled there and preached, but they didn't go along so well with the pagan kings. So, of course, like elsewhere in the Roman Empire and whatnot, Christianity didn't click. So Lots of persecution. The king there, actually, his name was Tiridates III. He actually had a man thrown into prison. This man's name was Gregory, I believe. Saint Gregory the Illuminator in the Armenian Apostolic Church. He refused to worship the pagan gods that Tiridates worshipped. And so it didn't please the king because he was a Christian. And Tiridates then, when he found out that Gregory was Gregory's father was responsible for killing his own father, he was furious and had him thrown into prison, into a big dungeon. And that's where Corvirac is. It's the dungeon where he was imprisoned.
Right.
So the story goes that then Tiridates actually went mad and would used to wander in the woods at night, growling like a beast. He'd lost his mind. Tiridates, I think, sister, went to him and said, I've had a vision, I've had a dream that there's this man called Gregory whom you imprisoned years ago. I believe it was 12 years ago. And she said, this man can actually cure you of your madness and your insanity. By this time, Gregory, he'd forgotten all about him. He had no idea about this man he'd thrown in prison. So he had the guards search for him, found him alive at the bottom of a prison, down the bottom of a dungeon. Gregory then, alive, probably pretty disheveled, I assume, came out alive after 12 years, converted him to Christianity, cured him of his madness, and the king had declared Christianity as the official religion of Armenia.
Wow.
So, yes, it's a fascinating story. Gregory had been kept alive for 12 years through a woman who threw bread down a hole in the ground that went into his cell. Was the only, as far as I know, the only reason he stayed alive for 12 years in the cell. And you can go there down into the cell today and have a look at the little dungeon down through a ladder. Mm-hmm. So it's a very remarkable place, very beautiful, very historic in the foothills of Mount Ararat. And that's where Christianity in Armenia was born.
Unbelievable. Tam and I were recently having a conversation. Another reason why I like Armenia is taking a step back, the parallel and the continual links between Christianity, more particularly Catholicism, and the juice of the grape, wine. And you referenced Georgia, but it seems to be a little contentious as to whether or not it's Georgia or Armenia.
Sure.
And there is a little province in Armenia called Areni. And Areni being three things: a Armenian grape varietal, a town, but also a cave. And I think it's located relatively close to Mount Ararat, and it's the first known winery.
I wouldn't be surprised at all.
In the world. And so I just, when I imagine that biblical story of Noah leaving the ark, and I think the first thing that he does when you read scripture is he planted grapevines. I just go, that's terrific.
Well,
that's
fair enough.
Armenia.
Wouldn't surprise me one bit.
Great. Okay. So let's talk about Steve the Catholic. So I understand you're a cradle Catholic.
Yeah.
And you were born in Toowoomba.
Yeah.
So can you just give me a little bit of background? Tell me a little bit about your story. What was it like growing up as a Catholic in Toowoomba?
Growing up, it was a good childhood, very good memories of my Catholicism with daily mass. When we could, wasn't possible. At least a few times a week, I'd say. Daily rosary, always. Adoration, pilgrimages, and processions. So we started out as pretty conventional, devout but conventional Catholics. We grew to become a lot more conservative and traditional as time went on. So we started getting drawn to the smells and the bells of the old ways and the Latin Mass. So I grew that way. And you move out of house, you move to Brisbane. I moved around a fair bit, moved to London, of course, and it's at that time where your role as a Catholic becomes a lot less unconscious and autonomic and much more of a choice, an act of the will to continue to becoming Catholic. So there comes that time where you have to think, without your parents and parents' opinions and persuasions, are you still going to fight the good fight and carry the flame? And so when you move out, they're the choices you have to make. And so I've chosen to keep up my faith. I choose to go to Mass. I choose to go to the Latin Mass, regular adoration, daily rosary. So I try to live my life as a devout Catholic. I try to observe the laws of Lent and fasting and the laws of the church. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you find that was something you were naturally predisposed towards in your youth, or was there staunch family infrastructure? Like, what was the most, to your mind, important factor in that Catholic foundation?
Sure, yeah, I was predisposed to it. Yeah, when you're brought up with it, it's what you know. So it's certainly much safer to stick with what you know. I guess if I were to step away from it, it would be a real big, a huge move and a huge a seismic shift to step away from what you've known. So it has been built in from my childhood to live my faith, but it comes a much more conscious, and you need to make the opinions of your own rather than listening to those around you. When you move out of home, live alone, travel a lot, you've sort of got to start to make up your mind on where you stand, and in terms of politics and things like that. But definitely my Catholic faith, it's had a huge impact on me, and it's one of the reasons why I love to travel. I think I hinted at it before that as a Catholic, there's so much reason to travel to these places, like to Armenia and Georgia, Russia, Europe, places like that.
Covers the globe,
exactly.
Literally.
Yeah, exactly.
Both temporally and geographically.
It is the universal church. That's right.
Very much so. But I just want to press you on a couple of things based on what you just said. So what I really like talking to people about on this show, especially cradle Catholics.
Sure.
Non-Catholics may listen to the stories of cradle Catholics who are born Catholic and they've maintained their faith, and to them that's very, very simple. You're born with it. That's the only reason you are Catholic. When I think that is a very superficial analysis of something that is quite complicated. As you just said, every Catholic that has the ability to allow their mind to explore, at various stages of their life, goes through times when they question, and they may not doubt it, but that they certainly question why they do what they do. Were there any times in your life where you really found yourself sort of going through what would I call it, that self-analysis?
Yeah, so there were in small ways in terms of opinions on political positions within the church regarding different expressions of the Eucharist and the Mass, but on a bigger level, there were times where you even question everything. You question absolutely everything. Where you pray for something very, very hard. You think you think you're given an answer, but it turns out it wasn't the answer. Or maybe you pray very, very hard and you're not given an answer at all. I think it's quite natural for people to start wondering, is anyone even listening? Was my whole upbringing just nonsense? Am I only Catholic because I grew up Catholic? There comes a time, probably in many people's lives, I'm sure it's not just me. I think possibly it's even speculated that even on the cross when Jesus was saying, "My God, why have you abandoned me?" People have speculated, obviously I'm not a theologian, but perhaps that was his human nature, not his divine nature, but his human nature, even questioning what was going on. Why has he been abandoned at this hour? So, reading the book of Job has been very important for me. I've read that at least twice, from cover to cover. One of my favorite books in the Old Testament, where the devil is asked to tempt Job, and God permits the devil to take away his livelihood, so his crops and his family, his money and whatnot. Everything goes wrong. He was a very devout, God-fearing man. He practiced all of the old Jewish customs and rituals, but everything went wrong, and so he turned to pray more and more, and things kept going more and more wrong the more he tried to fix it up. And he eventually something in him just went, and he went mad. He lost his faith. He got angry at God, and
he had some friends that weren't too helpful along the way.
Exactly. Well, some of them were, some of them weren't. So some of his friends, lots of dialogue between him and his friends, but eventually God talks him back into it, and he says, "Look, Job, can you count the stars? Can you see what's happening in the universe? Do you have any idea what's going on?" And eventually puts him in his place. And so I think it's something very natural. It's very biblical. People in the Bible question it. I'm sure many saints have questioned it. It's very natural too. So I think if you feel ashamed for questioning it, well, maybe it's a sign of maturity. Maybe you're coming out of your, maybe you're coming off your bottle and becoming a mature Catholic, and that you've stopped believing it because it's what you've known, and you've started to believe it because it's what you truly have accepted.
Okay, and you already, in a way, have answered my next question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway, and maybe we can just unpack it a little bit further. So when you confronted or found yourself confronted by these challenges, what impact did it really have on you personally, and how did you confront it? Like, was it a matter of that Job, like, accepting or coming to terms with the place you have in the hierarchy of creation, or the relationship man has with his creator? Or was it just endurance and time and allowing it all to sink in? And did it really get you down? Because a lot of people, there's no shortages, as you just said, of people and young men and women confronted by these challenges. And I think, regrettably, it would be safe to say the majority of them these days allow those challenges to overcome them. And then if you turn to a story like Job, it's interesting because I've recently just finished reading the book of Job.
Oh, fantastic.
And I'd say for the first time, not the first time reading the book, but the first time reading it where I think I've actually sort of understood it.
Yeah.
In the sense of finding, not ironic, but just the interesting way in which God responds. He doesn't actually give Job an answer, but he asks him those awesome sorts of questions.
He asks him questions he can't answer.
Yeah, and you summed it up really well, where it's almost like he puts Job in his place. But the atheistic onlooker may go, but look at poor Job. Why was God putting Job in his place? You know, you extrapolate that to the question of suffering people ask today, and they go, why would a God feel the need to put Job in his place? You know, Job was a just man. So, yeah, you know, I think that the book is interesting in and of itself, but just applying that to ourselves, like how do you find?
Yeah, so it felt during that time, it was horrible. It was truly horrible to be doubting something you've never doubted, and to think, hang on, do I really believe this, or do I only believe it by nature of my upbringing? So it was truly a terrifying moment. Like, what would I do if I identified as agnostic or something? My whole life would be turned upside down. My family, my friends, everyone I know, my whole culture, Sunday mass and rosary, everything would just stop. So it was a truly terrifying experience. So I can imagine for many people it would be likewise. It would turn their whole life upside down. I think though you've got to, like Job, you need to realize that God's plans are incomprehensible. The universe is incomprehensible. The universe is incomprehensibly big. So we don't know his plans, and that there's no guarantee that we'll get the answers that we want, and there's no guarantees that we'll be able to hear his voice every time that we ask for it. Job was a just man, and things went very wrong, but it was a trial. That's how we know if we love God. If he deprives us of things, will we still love him, or will we reject him? Do we only do these rituals? Do we only say our rosary? Do we only go to mass as some sort of security for a successful, happy life? Or do we go to mass, do we praise him, and do we love him? Do we pray the rosary even if nothing goes right? That's the real test. If things go wrong, where are our loyalties? Is God a fair weather friend? Are we a fair weather friend, or are we committed to God? Just as God appeared to abandon his son on the cross, God might appear to abandon us. Many saints went through dark periods of aridity in their prayer, where they felt like God had abandoned them. Many saints suffered enormously, Therese of Lisieux, for instance, had many dark times, and so it's certainly there's certainly no guarantee of happiness. There's no guarantee of having the prayers answered that we in the way that we want them to. So we just have to realize that the Bible has so many answers in it. There's so much good literature out there as well. I've finished recently reading The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. All of those things have really helped you get a grip on the whole issue and help you realize that God's there. He loves us even if things don't seem to go the way we want.
Okay, just jumping back to something else you said. It was a little while ago now, but you were recounting how over the course of your Catholic upbringing, your family steered more towards the traditional / I think you used the word conservative.
Yeah, that's right.
Catholic practices. And can I just ask you for a little bit of expanding on that point?
Sure.
Because that, once again, that's a matter without getting drawn into a lot of the politics and the wider issues that have really engulfed, ironically, the one holy Catholic Church.
Yeah.
A lot of people find themselves, a lot of particularly young people these days, drawn towards more traditional forms of practice. So can I just get your perspective on what was that like, going from point A, what you had, and then towards point B, where you moved towards what you would identify as your Catholic faith as it is today?
Yeah, so I identify as a traditionalist Catholic. Specifically what that means, I'm not sure, but broadly it means I'm attracted to the Latin Mass. Growing up, we moved in that direction by attending Latin Mass where we could. It wasn't always available in my hometown of Toowoomba, but we'd attend it where we could. When I moved out of town, moved to Brisbane, it was my regular Mass. It was always it was reliable in that you knew what you'd got. You knew what you would get. You'd always get a reverent liturgy. There'd be no liturgical abuses. Nothing novel or experimental. You just get good, solid Catholicism. When I moved to London, I attended the Latin Mass there weekly, and even traveling around the world, I used a website called Wikimissa, which is I think it's gone offline now, but it's an online database of every Latin Mass in the world that you could log on to and find. So if you're in France or if you're in Italy or Germany or wherever you happen to be, you can find a Latin Mass for Sunday. So I've definitely been drawn to that, no doubt about it. And yeah, a lot of young people are delving into that. It's a very well acknowledged trend over the last 10, 15 years ago. Some people have just put it down to rebelliousness, in that a generation will try to rebel from its elders. So, for instance, the young people will try to rebel against the baby boomers and all of the tambourines and all the guitars at Mass, and they would rebel against that. But likewise, the baby boomers would rebel against their parents by having all of their baby boomer nonsense in the first place. So I think that would explain part of it. Perhaps is just a natural rebelliousness, but I think there's something a lot more deep than that. Perhaps perhaps an acknowledgement that young people really know. They know truth when they see it, and they can spot a fake a mile away, and they want something. They want something uncomfortable in a very comfortable time. They really want to be challenged, and you don't get that at a regular Mass. You only get it from the pulpit at a more conservative Mass, where you only get challenged to be better and to do more and to be more from a more conservative Mass. So I think that's what draws people to that, is a sense of pride in their past and a sense of wanting to be challenged a lot more than the previous generation.
Okay. Speaking of challenges, I want to draw on once again the length and breadth of your travels and the global perspective you have, and combine that with what we've just discussed in terms of your transition from you've seen both, I guess, I don't want to call them extremes, but both sides of the aisle in terms of the Catholic Church. I'll start by asking, what do you think are some of the challenges facing, maybe let's start with Catholic youth today?
Yeah, so I guess in the broader perspective of that Catholic youth question, in the context of me having travelled quite broadly, is simply that many countries don't have access to the old Mass. So the Latin Mass is what was normal, what was the law of the land a while ago. It's now unknown in many places. Being in Australia or America or France, it's quite common, actually very common. But many countries around the world just simply don't have it. There would be no parish in the entire country. So that one of the problems facing it would be that there is no access to it. Possibly another problem facing Catholic youth would be potentially a rise in division, potentially political division. Perhaps the more mainstream Catholics viewing traditionalists as rigid and rebellious, and the traditional Catholics viewing the more mainstream Catholics as liberals and lefties and Protestants. So I think that's a challenge. I think all division would be a very unfortunate thing. So I think we'd have to be careful with the times ahead to make sure that there's mutual respect, so that none of these divisions and rifts happen, leading to schisms or rifts or apostasy. We need to try to unite, bring the church together, rather than trying to go further to one side or the other.
What sort of impact do you think these more public scandals have on Catholic youth? Because I think you can look at it both externally and internally. So internally, there's the Catholics on both sides of the aisle trying to figure out where they fit and hopefully open mind a genuine pursuit of truth.
That's right.
But then you've got those outside the fold, outside the church, fingers crossed, hopefully trying to find their way in. And some of the problems that we see plaguing the church today in the public sphere are things that you almost couldn't think of to write in, top selling criminal books. The child sex scandals,
exactly.
the Vatican financial corruption scandals. And I think it's one thing, you and I sitting here having that conversation, because I feel maybe it's just by virtue of being a cradle Catholic. I don't particularly feel like those are challenges to my personal faith, and I would imagine you're the same. Yet I definitely know of firsthand. Therefore, it's very easy to imagine how far wide those matters go to challenging the faith of others. So what sort of perspectives do you have on those things?
Of course. Look, most of my friends are Catholics, and most of my views are, I guess, internal to that school of thought, in that scandals inside the church wouldn't drive them away, because they believe in the church, because they believe in its founder, Jesus. They believe Jesus founded the Catholic Church. That they're aware that Judas betrayed Christ, and they're aware that there are modern day Judases betraying the church. So the fact that it's full of corruption and scandal wouldn't drive them away. And I love my church, but I'm the first to admit that it's full of corruption in the Vatican. Even drug scandals, apart from the sexual scandals. So plenty of bad news going on there. But most of my friends, that wouldn't make them leave, because they believe in something more than that, something much bigger, rather than the people that run it. It's more about the ultimate founder, which is Christ. If I was an outsider, so if I'd been brought up in a pretty agnostic family or atheist family, and I living a pretty mainstream life, watching mainstream news, I really don't. I've thought about it before. If I would have become a Catholic, if I hadn't been brought up as a Catholic, and honestly, I don't know. I really don't know. The Catholic Church doesn't get any good press. It's full of corruption, historic sex abuse, things like that. So it would be really hard to answer that if I'd be able to work around that intellectually and realize that, hey, it's still worth loving. It's still worth joining and being a faithful member of, despite all the rot. So it's not, thankfully, it's not for me to judge others for not becoming Catholic, because if I wasn't Catholic, who knows where I could be. I could end up as a Protestant or an atheist or something else. Who knows?
I've often had those exact thoughts from my own situation, but I wonder if one maybe positive takeaway from that very grim situation is the fact that, as you identified earlier, there seems to be a bit of a movement of younger people towards tradition, and without necessarily being able to identify the cause for that, you could say that they've identified something of substance that they're moving towards, and maybe that alone is enough for hopefully a lot of people to be able to see through a lot of the very distracting noise and come into contact with the substance that really is the Catholic Church.
I hope so, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it does. I think the old mass and more traditional masses do attract the young people for that purpose. Perhaps young people are, as I said, it could just, part of it could be explained to a rebelliousness that young people have to their previous generation, but I think they are able to pick up a fraud and catch on that and separate fact from fiction. And when they attend a Latin Mass, it's so different. It's so incredibly different to any other religious experience, Protestants or otherwise. There's something so very different about it, challenging about it, and sacred about it, that draws them back. I can tell you that my local parish in Brisbane that does the Latin Mass, it's now having 3 Latin Masses on Sunday to cope with the extra crowd that turns up.
Oh, wow.
So it's
great problem to have.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great problem. And anecdotally, it's happening all around the world as well. So lots of diocesan parishes, of course, they've been slowly dying for a long time, with the exception of places that have a lot of migration from places like Africa, India, and the Philippines, which have large Catholic populations. So they'll boost a local diocesan parish, but if it wasn't for migration, most of them would be covered with grey hair or not nobody at all. But in terms of a proper thriving young parish, I've noticed it. I'm sure you've noticed it, and anecdotally, it's
definitely
happening around
COVID.
the world. Definitely. Partly that the Brisbane Archdiocese has banned communion on the tongue, which I completely disagree with. But Latin Mass is, of course, exempt from that. In Latin Mass, that practice is forbidden. So that would obviously be one reason that would draw fed up parishioners at other parishes to seek out a Latin Mass so they can get communion on the tongue. So it could be a multitude of factors, but it's certainly growing up. I just hope that it happens around the world in the countries that don't have it. I think we're lucky in Australia, where most people would live within an hour of a Latin Mass. Same for other countries around the world, but huge areas of the world don't have any within hundreds or thousands of kilometres.
Okay, let's move away from the negative and maybe focus on the positive. So, once again, drawing on the length and breadth of your experience, what are some of those beautiful factors about Catholicism that you would encourage those exploring their own faith or exploring maybe taking that initial step towards becoming Catholic? What sort of things would you point people towards to really illustrate the beauty and the richness of Catholicism? Yeah,
definitely a trip to Rome would be on the top of the list. Seeing the Vatican Museum, St. Peter's Basilica, it's the home of Catholicism. I was dissing it out a few minutes ago for being a den of corruption, but it's also an incredibly beautiful place. When you Sistine Chapel, for instance, it needs no introduction, or the Pieta. The history of Catholicism and what it's done to Western civilization. It's built Western civilization. It's It kept out rampant Islam from destroying Europe. It's kept many times throughout history. It's led to huge developments in science, politics, philosophy, theology. Its effects on Western civilization can't be exaggerated. So anyone wanting to explore Catholicism or look into it, they should, after COVID, book a flight to Europe and check out some of the influences it's had in Europe, in Rome, in Paris, in many different places.
Do you notice that the different cultures and histories and places that you've travelled to, in terms of old world mentalities versus new world mentalities, have you ever noticed that plays some sort of either direct or accidental influence on their approach to Catholicism? And look, that was probably a really poorly worded question, but you definitely hear people talking about, in terms of approaches to life, those poorer countries have this really rich spirit, whereas it's that the first world countries that, all the bells and whistles and the technology, but they're the first to abandon the substantive. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I definitely have noticed that many places. Unfortunately, Europe is what was the home of Catholicism is largely left it now. Many empty churches. I think their material success has led to them worshipping God, or perhaps, not worshipping God, worshipping money, worshipping pleasure and other pursuits, worshipping their career, and abandoning God, and living the good life. In other countries, in Southeast Asia and places I've visited, places where they have nothing, absolutely nothing, but they're the places that have the most faith, and they're the places that are happier than the Western countries, the places that put less focus on money, more focus on their faith and on their family. It's a small story, but to, I guess, illustrate what I'm saying, I was in Vanuatu a couple of years ago. So Vanuatu is a Pacific Island country. Most of the population would be, I think, Seventh-day Adventist or Lutheran or Mormon, some sort of Christian with the large. There's a French influence there, so there's a large Catholic minority there as well. The people there are very, very poor. But they're consistently, I noticed, some of the happiest people you'll ever meet. I was wanting a lift, actually, to go to a waterfall with my sister-in-law and her children. Going to ask a van driver, so a cabbie or an Uber, essentially, just a van, to drive me there. And I said, will you drive me to the waterfall? And I said, look, I'll give you money. And he said, no, I'm not interested. I just want to enjoy my day. I believe it was a Sunday, perhaps. Don't quote me on that. I think it was a Sunday. But he wasn't interested. I was willing to pay him.
He just wanted to give you a lift.
No, he just didn't want to drive.
Oh,
he just didn't want to drive at all. He just didn't want to go anywhere.
Yeah.
But they're the people that drive up and down the main street and look for lifts. But it was a Sunday, it was day off. I was a white Western tourist offering him cash to drive me down the road, and he just didn't want to. He was just minded. It was just his family day. It was his Sunday. It was his day off. He wasn't interested. Other countries, say Indonesia. Indonesia's it's the largest Muslim country in the world by numbers, not in intensity, but certainly in numbers. People there will hound you for a lift 24/7. So how much of that's due to religion? Who knows? But it's certainly a very different culture. You see it all over the place. The poorer the country, often the happier they are.
In that questionnaire I sent you, I don't want to divulge any of the confidential information that you provided, but I was very interested in one of the comments you made where you, to paraphrase, you said, despite all the problems that the Catholic Church is facing today, and we've spent a little bit of time discussing those in this interview, despite that, you have a very positive outlook in the future. Can you spend a little bit of time talking about that? What's the positive outlook and why do you have such a positive outlook, bearing in mind what we've discussed? What sort of hope is there?
Yeah, I do have a positive outlook. I think things will get better. I guess as Westerners, we like to be very focused on the West, and as a Catholic in the West, it's certainly not so good. You've got Western civilization crumbling. You've got same-sex marriage, abortion on demand, all sorts of nonsense happening around the West. So it's very easy to get depressed and downhearted. But when you travel to poorer countries, you realise that the church is thriving there. The mass attendance, the amount of monasteries and seminaries that are opening up and bursting at the seams, that there is a lot to get positive about. So I think the church is shifting from Europe to Asia to Africa. So there's a lot to be upset about if you're looking at it from a Western perspective. But globally speaking, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about the future. You can see that with the young people. They're fewer in the West, but a lot more fervent, a lot more devout, and a lot more willing to be outspoken, to be ridiculed in public. I think that will continue to grow. I think that the West will continue to get worse for a while with soft persecution. But long term, I'm very optimistic. We have our promises as well from various private revelation from the saints that Mary's Immaculate Heart will triumph and that Christ will reign in the end. So there's certainly good reason to be optimistic, Tom.
What would your closing comments be to a young person around about our age? I'm going to give you two hypothetical people. One is within Catholicism, going through a dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
That they are Catholic, they're cradle Catholic, they've grown up Catholic, yet they're going through all the problems that you and I unpacked in this podcast. What would your advice to him or her be?
Yeah, my advice would be, well, firstly, read the book of Job. Certainly had a huge impact on me. Read The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. Plenty of other books out there on the problem of pain, the problem of suffering. Speak to a spiritual director about it. Don't be ashamed. Realize that many people do it, and possibly it's a rite of passage. Even many saints have done it. So it's nothing. It's nothing that's uncommon. It's very common. Keep heart and realize that God's plans are bigger than your doubts. That we can't understand His movements. If God can create the universe, if He can create the world and can create galaxies billions of light years away, then He's certainly there looking out for you. Sermon on the Mount as well. Read the Sermon on the Mount. One of the most beautiful pieces of literature ever. Mm-hmm.
I'd agree. And God can draw straight with crooked lines.
Exactly.
I heard somebody once say. The second case study, hypothetical person is the same person going through a dark night of the soul, but outside Catholicism. And they look at Catholicism, they can't understand it, and they can't bring themselves for an infinite number of reasons to take those initial steps in its direction.
Yeah.
What sort of comments would you make to that person?
You tell them that look at what the world's doing to you. Look at what the world wants you to do. It wants you to be saturated with sensuality. It wants you to be living for endless Netflix binges, endless nightclubs, endless Spotify playlists, just endless alcohol. It just wants to numb you with so much sensation, to numb you into submission so that you can't feel or experience everything. I'd encourage them to look out from that, look at the other side, go to church, go to adoration where it's literally just a quiet room, just you and the Blessed Sacrament, nothing else, nothing to distract you. There's no phones, no drinking, no TV, no music. It's just a silent room, you and God. Let God speak to you. He won't speak to you if you just blocked your life out with mind-numbing entertainment and Netflix. So look at that. Look at the churches a rescue from that. And certainly it doesn't look like a very good refuge with all of the sex abuse scandals, all of the all of the really crappy music coming out of like modern churches and all of that stuff. But look at the church as a ship. It might be a leaky old ship. It might be getting tossed around, but it's better than being tossed into the waters. So stay on, don't jump the ship. Try and get on board, and it'll be your ark through all the waves.
And I do appreciate the way you put that, because if, for example, friends of mine, I grew up with a number of non-Catholic friends, and I just came to appreciate, I believe, over time, the concept of noise, and silence, and somebody who is immature and lacking that Catholic perspective may actually listen to what you just said and go, where's the problem? You know, the noise, the chaos, the sex, the drugs, the everything that people put themselves in harm's way, literally, to attain, because these things are perceived goods. But I think the Western world has really shown today that when you turn that music off, and it inevitably does get turned off, and you're left with nothing but yourself.
Yeah.
That metaphorical nakedness. You're insecure.
People are scared. They're scared.
Cannot handle it.
Can't handle being by themselves. They can't handle being by themselves or not being entertained, because they have no security. They have no faith, no identity. So their life is being busy. They pride themselves with being busy with work, busy with sport, busy with TV or just entertainment, just endless busy from the time they're born to the time they die, because they can't handle silence. They can't handle peace and quiet. They can't handle time alone to let God speak to them. God won't force himself on you. You've got to take time out and arrange a time. Just like I arrange a time to come here with you, you've got to arrange a time to chat to God and speak to God. He won't just, not everyone's as lucky as Saul. He doesn't just come out from the clouds and wake you up. You got to take your time out and speak to him. Let him speak to you.
I promise this is going to be my closing question. I just feel like I have to ask Exodus 90.
Yeah.
So I've had a number of people on the show over the period of months. Number of them have done Exodus 90. Everybody has different perspectives on it. I must admit, I was not game enough to do it again this year for a number of reasons I won't go into.
Because you love your wine.
Because I love my wine. But how are you finding it? Give me some thoughts.
It's rewarding, Tom. So it starts off difficult because it's a real kick up the backside and being thrown in the deep end. But then you get used to it, and you go through a time where you think, oh yeah, this is pretty good. I'm on top of it, no dramas. But then after like day 40, when you're about halfway, you're really, really over it. You're really sick of it. Like you've done a Lenten period of 40 days and you've got a whole Lenten period left, which is basically now. So it's at that time where you're just so sick of it, and that confidence you have is gone, and it's just a drag to the end. So there's a lot involved. I'm certainly not going to claim that I've been 100% with the asceticisms and the different commitments, but I don't regret it. I don't regret starting it, and I encourage every young man to do it. It's a good remedy for the world, a good remedy for young men in the world. It's a bit of a boot camp. And a bit of a spiritual retreat rolled into one.
I'm going to embrace my own hypocrisy and echo your thoughts, because, look, it's a great thing to do. And I think the main reason why I just couldn't bring myself to do it was, that sounds pathetic, and it is pathetic, but I was talking to a brother of mine who did it with me last year, and I think a third brother of mine asked both of us if we were going to do it, to which the brother responded, "Do it. Didn't we just finish it?" And I thought, oh gosh, it really seems like we did. But Steve, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Hopefully it hasn't been too much of an inconvenience for you. I've loved it's just been a riveting conversation. Really appreciate you making the effort, taking the time, and I wish you all the best in your future travels. Hopefully you can turn that 57 into maybe a 114. That'd see the rest of the world.
Yeah.
The world is your oyster.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's a pleasure.
Steve Purcell is somebody who believes in the culture, history, and beauty of Catholicism, and that everybody can draw the same benefit from it if they have an open mind. Thank you again, Steve.
No worries. Good night.
That's it from the Lounge Room this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe to Lounge Room Chats podcast and give us a review. If you enjoyed it, let us know. If you didn't enjoy it, let us know anyway. And share it to your friends. Even if you didn't enjoy it, maybe your friends have better taste than you and they will enjoy it. So thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time in the Lounge Room.